On June 6, 1944, Allied landing craft smashed into the Normandy coast and were ripped apart by a torrent of German fire. D-Day collapsed in minutes, and the Atlantic Wall held. In the hours that followed, the shattered remnants of the U.S. First Army and the British 3rd Infantry Division scrambled back to their ships, while the Luftwaffe roared over the wreckage, claiming a victory no one thought possible. The failure sent shockwaves through London, Washington, and Moscow. The world suddenly faced a Europe where the Western Front was a dead end. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. The immediate fallout was chaotic. Eisenhower's command structure fractured, Churchill demanded an explanation, and Stalin pressed for an accelerated Soviet push westward. Yet beneath the surface lay a deeper question that would haunt the Allies for years. How could a single failed amphibious assault reshape the entire balance of power? The answer lies in the chain of decisions set in motion long before the beaches were breached. The German High Command, stunned by the unexpected repulse, seized the moment to transform the Atlantic Wall from a series of static defenses into an integrated war machine. Hitler ordered General Erwin Rommel's successor, Günther Blumentritt, to fortify every kilometer of coastline with additional artillery, anti-tank hedgehogs, and newly deployed Tiger tanks concealed in forested dunes. By late summer 1944, the once leaky barrier had become a near-impenetrable shield. Allied planners, now forced to abandon Operation Overlord, scrambled for alternatives. The United States considered an invasion of southern France earlier than planned, while the British debated a daring amphibious assault on the Low Countries. Yet each option required time, a commodity the Germans were rapidly draining by tightening supply lines across the Channel and intensifying U-boat attacks. The question lingered. Could the Allies muster another cross-Channel offensive before Germany consolidated its newfound dominance? The answer would hinge on an unexpected development in the East. While the West reeled, the Soviet Union pressed forward on a vastly different timetable. Operation Barbarossa had already stretched German resources thin. The Red Army's victory at Stalingrad in February 1943 had forced Hitler to divert divisions from the west to the east. By mid-1944, Stalin ordered an unprecedented second front, not across the Channel, but through the Balkans and into Austria, aiming to seize Vienna before the Germans could fully reinforce their Atlantic defenses. The Soviet thrust was brutal and swift. In August 1944, Red Army units crossed the Carpathians, overwhelming Hungarian forces and breaking through the Siegfried Line's southern flank. The rapid advance shocked Berlin. Hitler ordered panic redeployments from France to protect Vienna, weakening the Atlantic Wall just as it seemed impregnable. Yet this maneuver raised a new dilemma. Would the Soviets halt at the Elbe or push further into Western Germany, threatening the very heart of the Third Reich? Their next move would determine whether Europe fell under a single iron fist or splintered into competing spheres. Back in Normandy, the Allies faced a grim reality. The failed landings left behind thousands of dead and wounded, and the loss of critical equipment crippled any immediate second attempt. Eisenhower convened an emergency conference in London with Churchill, Roosevelt, and General George Marshall. They debated whether to launch a new amphibious assault from the south, Operation Dragoon, instead of rebuilding a battered northern front. The decision was delayed by political infighting. The British were wary of committing troops to another costly beachhead without guaranteed air superiority, while American leaders feared that a southern invasion would leave the Soviet Union free to dominate Central Europe unchallenged. An uneasy compromise emerged. The Allies would focus on an intensive strategic bombing campaign against German industrial centers in the Ruhr and Berlin, hoping to cripple Hitler's war machine from above, while the Soviets bore the brunt of ground combat in the east. This strategy opened a critical question that lingered through 1945. Could air power alone force Germany's surrender without a Western ground invasion? The answer would be tested as the bombing raids intensified and civilian morale began to crumble under relentless fire. From late 1944 into early 1945, Allied bombers swarmed over German skies in unprecedented numbers. The 8th Air Force and RAF Bomber Command unleashed thousands of sorties targeting synthetic oil plants, ball-bearing factories, and railway hubs. The Luftwaffe, already depleted after the Normandy debacle, struggled to intercept the formations. Its remaining fighters were scattered across a patchwork of makeshift airfields along the fortified coast. The sustained onslaught crippled German production, causing fuel shortages that grounded many Tiger tanks and limited the Wehrmacht's ability to reinforce the Atlantic Wall. Yet, paradoxically, the bombing also hardened civilian resolve in some regions, while elsewhere it sparked spontaneous uprisings in cities like Hamburg and Dresden. The Allies wondered whether these internal revolts could be harnessed to open a western corridor into Germany. Amid the chaos, an unexpected diplomatic overture emerged from Berlin. A faction within the German military, led by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, proposed a conditional ceasefire with the Western Allies, hoping to drive the Soviets out of Eastern Europe. The proposal raised a tantalizing possibility. Could the West negotiate a separate peace that would split Germany's enemies? This notion would reverberate through the final months of the war. In March 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on Vienna and Budapest, the German High Command, desperate for relief, accepted Eisenhower's overture for a limited armistice on the Western Front. The agreement stipulated that all Allied troops would halt offensive operations west of the Rhine, while Germany committed to cease hostilities against British and American forces. In return, the Allies promised not to occupy German territory beyond the Rhine and to allow humanitarian aid into civilian populations. The ceasefire shocked the world. While the Soviets continued their relentless push toward Berlin, the Western Front entered a tense stalemate. The United States and Britain redirected resources to support the Soviet advance indirectly, providing Lend-Lease supplies through Iran and Turkey, but refrained from direct engagement beyond the Rhine. This division of effort created two parallel war tracks, one where the Red Army bore the brunt of crushing Nazi resistance, and another where Western forces consolidated a defensive line while rebuilding their amphibious capabilities. The open question now loomed large. What would happen to a Germany split between Soviet occupation in the east and a nominally autonomous Western zone under German civilian administration? The answer began to crystallize as Berlin fell in May 1945. When Soviet troops finally stormed Berlin on May 20, 1945, they discovered a city already emptied of its Nazi leadership. Hitler had committed suicide weeks earlier, but the German armed forces remained fragmented. The Red Army declared victory over the capital, yet the Western armistice prevented Allied troops from entering the city. Instead, a provisional Soviet administration was installed in East Berlin, while West Berlin stayed under the limited authority granted by the ceasefire. Germany's unconditional surrender, which in our history came on May 7, 1945, now unfolded differently. The German High Command signed separate capitulation documents, one with the Soviets, surrendering all forces east of the Elbe, another with the Western Allies, agreeing to a demilitarized zone west of the Rhine and the retention of a civilian government in the remaining territories. The war technically ended on May 7th, but the political settlement left Europe divided far more starkly than in our timeline. The United States, wary of Soviet expansion, began supplying the Western German states with food, equipment, and advisors, effectively creating a buffer zone that would later evolve into a distinct political entity. Britain focused on rebuilding its own war-torn economy while maintaining a military presence along the Atlantic coast to guard against any renewed German aggression. The Soviets, having shouldered the majority of ground combat, emerged as the dominant power in Eastern Europe, establishing satellite regimes from Poland to Czechoslovakia. The lingering question, how long would this uneasy bifurcation endure? The answer stretched into 1947, when a series of border skirmishes and economic crises forced both sides to negotiate a more permanent division of the continent. By 1919, by 191, by 1919, night. Look. Look.